Greetings, everyone. I hope everybody finds themselves well. Today, we're going to review the composing of the literature review. So, last presentation, we were going over how to compose a research introduction, whether you were approaching it from an analytical point of view or an argumentative point of view. Whichever stance you were taking, or whichever approach you were taking, rather. What comes next is, in essence, the core of the research paper. This is where you're basically telling the reader, look, I've observed the research that's out there, and I'm pointing out, the framings of the research on my particular topic, and thus, in a way, by providing you with these framings, I'm also demonstrating a need for my research claim. So you're basically saying, look, this is what the research says, and here are the gaps, and in many ways, my claim or my analysis, it's going to provide a filling in of those gaps, right? Now, it's not always the case that you're in essence going to provide something new, completely fresh. I mean, it's really difficult to do, so in essence, you're going to do what's called reinforce, right? You are going to reinforce the research that's out there. Nevertheless, in your reinforcing, you're also going to validate your own claim, so to speak. Okay. So let's begin. So a literature review, by definition, is an analytical synthesis. That means that that means that you're synthesizing these sources in an investigative manner of existing scholarship that maps key arguments and evidence, evaluates their strengths and limits, and identifies the gap your paper addresses. Again, you're synthesizing all these sources, and in your synthesis of these sources, you're demonstrating the general key arguments that are out there, the evidence that's out there. You're going to evaluate the strengths of these sources, and you're also going to demonstrate the limits of these sources. I think it's important that you acknowledge that, that you're aware and gain consciousness that you shouldn't just passively accept that whatever research is out there, is the end-all be-all. You want to point out some of the limitations. So sometimes it's good when you're reading several articles and you say, oh, there seems to be a slight disagreement here. And that's great, because that's going to demonstrate a couple of little bit of, the limits that are out there, so to speak, right? And why is that important? Because in essence, if you do that, then you're identifying gaps that your paper is going to seek to address. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. All right. So let's keep going a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about what the literature review is. And in essence, in an argumentative or analytical research paper, this is where you're conducting what's called a scholarly conversation. So what are you going to do here? You're going to argue what the research already shows. And by arguing, it doesn't mean you're agreeing. That means you're establishing what the research is showing out there, right? You're going to you're showing what you're going to, the agreements that are there, but you're also going to demonstrate the disagreements, right? What the research disagrees about, and here's a gap, and you're also demonstrating what still needs to be explained, in essence, so you can justify your own claim. So here's the research. What are the agreements the research shows, right? Not that you agree with it, you're just showing what the scholars out there agree with. And then you're also going to demonstrate what the scholars out there disagree with. And then you're going to show, what hasn't really been addressed or explained. And this is where you can justify your own claim for your research, okay? So how do you connect it to your thesis? Well, your thesis, in a way, is going to suggest that you have an awareness of what others have argued. Second, you're inferring that your thesis is absolutely necessary well, maybe I shouldn't say absolutely, but you're in essence saying that your thesis is indeed necessary, and thus necessary, I guess, in a way, is credible. And in essence, you're saying, your thesis is credible, right? It's credible because it's going to fit the landscape that you're in essence presenting. So what does a literature review do? Well, a literature review is going to do 4 key things. It's going to synthesize evidence. It's going to establish the conversation. It's going to evaluate the research. And it's going to create a gap and the stakes associated with the gap. You're not providing a summary. It's not what you're doing here. It's not what this is. You're in essence providing an analysis, right? You're saying, look, this is what the research is showing. And interestingly, these are the disagreements regarding that research, right? And then I think this is key for ensuring that you're not just simply summarizing. You're in essence saying, look, I've shown you the agreements, I've shown you the disagreements. Now I'm going to evaluate the credibility of this research, right? And in showing you my evaluation of this research, I'm also going to demonstrate the necessity for my claim, right? I'm going to show you the gaps that are there and why my research is necessary. So let's go step by step. Let's look at the 4. Let's look at these key elements, right, of the literature review. So, first element is the synthesizing of evidence. So, what does this mean? Does it mean just simply gather all of the articles that are out there? No, you're not just simply going to gather the articles. You're going to read the research and you're going to tell yourself, okay, how do I want to organize in my paper all this research that I'm collecting? Okay, well, I'm going to do it thematically. Maybe I'm looking at the humanities or the social sciences. And, maybe I want to address these key themes that I want to address in my research. Or maybe if I'm doing a more scientific paper, maybe you're saying, here in my scientific paper, these are the methods that are out there. This is the agreed upon process, and also maybe the disagreed upon process. And then you're going to say, and then you're going to say, okay, let's first talk about this. What a particular framing of particular methods is going to do, and then maybe disagreements within some of these methods, right? Anyhow, you're collecting articles, and then you're going to organize via headings, key headings, that are going to organize your structuring of the research that you've gathered, right? Maybe you want to begin with the agreements, right? Although it's kind of, sometimes it's better, I think, to do. I don't think you should separate the agreement from the disagreement. Actually, I draw back a little bit on that. Instead, it's key in a particular, almost, I don't know how to say it. Maybe like a thematic framing of sorts, and within that particular theme. And so now think of a method. If you're doing a method, just like the theme, the particularity of a method, what are the agreements and disagreements in the framing of a method approach or thematic approach, right? And then maybe the next heading is going to give a different theme and a different method, and then you're going to show them the agreements and disagreements there, right? And then when you do that, you can talk a little bit about maybe amongst these agreements and disagreements, why the results differ. Okay, so I'll mention a little bit more on the synthesizing of evidence by this grouping of your organizing of your paper by means of themes or methods, right? Okay, so now you've established a thematic or method-based organization of your paper. And so now that you've done that, you want to bring about the conversation, right? Now, this should be noted, you are not providing your voice. That sounds terrible, right? I mean, because it's still your voice. Your analysis is your voice, but you're not bringing in your point of view to this section of the paper. Remember, this here is where you're in essence emphasizing the research that's out there. So what are the scholars debating about your topic? What are the agreements and what are the disagreements? And I think it's important to surface opposing views. If you just have nothing but agreements, then you're not going to leave much for a gap, right? You might not get much of an audience if everything is agreed upon, so to speak. I think it's key to show disagreements. That's what surfaces good research. Why is research needed? Because we still have disagreements about it, and so in those agreements and disagreements, what are the major schools of thought, right? What are the frameworks that are being positioned in situating this conversation? Okay. So I'll show you an example in a little bit, so it'll make a little bit more sense. Once you do that, once you've established a conversation, once you've shown what the agreements and disagreements are, and for the most part, why these agreements are present, right? Then you're going to evaluate the research. Are there biases? Are there gaps? Have there been, have the studies been weak? Have there been particular populations maybe that are missing, or maybe an approach is just anachronistic and a little bit outdated, so to speak. So evaluate the research, make a commentary about the value of the research. And then finally, you're going to create the gap. This is where you're going to say, okay, look, I've shown you the agreements, I've shown you the disagreements, I've shown you why they exist. And I've also shown you my evaluation of them. And now I'm going to give you a gap. This is what hasn't been resolved, right? So your literature should show what is unresolved or underexplained, right? And this is towards the end. You're showing, you're demonstrating, you're saying, look, this is what my paper is going to offer. This is what it's going to do that hasn't already been done, right? And this is what's important about it. So you might in essence refine the literature that's out there, or you might challenge it. You might extend it. You might apply something to it, or you might reframe. Maybe you might be saying, look, this is what the research is doing, but maybe they could have done it this way, and this is what I'm going to do. Okay. So again, let's review now the difference between a synthesis and a summary. So a summary is simply going to say, an author A says X and author B says Y. All right. I mean, you're kind of just listing there. You don't want to do that. You're in essence going to say, look, most researchers on this particular topic, they agree on, whatever it is, but this is where they disagree. And this is why they disagree. This is why it's present, or this is why they use different methods. Maybe this method is this way, maybe that method is that way. And maybe these are the groups that are studying. This is why they're studying those groups. So because of these differences, it still leaves these unresolved questions. Okay. All right. So again, we previously talked about, when we talked about synthesizing the literature, step one, you're synthesizing the literature. There's three different ways in which to frame them. And I am repeating myself a little bit, but I think it's important. Repetition, I think, helps you absorb it a little bit clearer and better. There's three particular lenses. Now, there's another resource that I don't have here, and that's a philosophical method. But I'm going to not go over that right now, and I'm just going to focus on these three approaches for simplicity's sake. So one approach is you could organize your literature review. That means you're organize it via these headings or these topic sentences. You're organize it thematically. Now, it's noted that a thematic organization is best for humanities and the social sciences. If you're doing it more of a STEM or a social science or a scientific study, you could do a methodological synthesis, right? What are the methods that are being applied? What are the methods that are being, inculcated in the study, right? And what are the disagreements between different methods? So you could do that. Or if you and sometimes this is possible, but it's not as broad as a thematic or a methodological approach. You could approach it from a chronological perspective, right? If there's a clear timeline in which you demonstrate maybe how a field evolved, so to speak, okay? So as a writer, you would organize your essay into sections, and you would name each section via a claim. So, for example, here's a naming, social media and learning, but that's that's kind of weak. It's still somewhat abstract. You want to try to be somewhat a little bit more precise. So here's a stronger section. Social media increases engagement, but undermines deep comprehension under multitasking conditions, right? Now, you don't want to go too long, right, per section, but you notice the difference between those two, okay? The next one says, so to end, be careful in the distinction between a heading and a topic sentence, right? So with the headings, you want to play a little bit with the wording, and you got to ensure that in your topic sentences, you're being a little bit more precise, more specific, okay? So what would it look like in writing, right? So on a page, again, you would organize it by means of headings, and the heading may be built around a claim, right? Obviously, I don't see how it cannot be built around a claim. So that claim, then you decide whether you're going to organize it thematically or method-wise or chronologically, right? So then once you have your headings, then you're going to create these topic sentences, right? You're going to make a claim about, a particularity in your topic in the field out there. And then once you make those topic sentences, then you, again, go through the process. You include a conversation. Be sure to acknowledge the sources from which that conversation is coming from. And here I note the evidence should come from 2 to 4 sources. Sometimes you don't want to have too many sources, right? At least in a particular field. But you can. I shouldn't limit it to 2 to 4 sources. But I think it's a starting point. Maybe that's somewhere you want to start. 2 to 4 sources, so to speak. So in addition, you're doing like a little bit of comparison and contrast. The agreements and the disagreements, whether it be thematic or methodological, right? The methods. In what way do they align? What are the agreements? And in what way do they not align? What are those conflicts? Again, and then what do? And then you implicate the gaps that are the result of these disagreements. What still remains unclear, and why is it important that we address those lack of clarities? Once you've addressed the gap issue, now you end the literature review, and you address in a few sentences. You say, look, this is how I'm going to respond to these gap implications. Okay. All right. So let's follow a couple of steps. Let's see if this helps you as well. Make a claim. This is going to be the claim. The claim also works with the headings. Right here, I'm addressing the topic sentence, but also addressed with the headings. So you're going to have a claim where you're going to have a particular. The claim is not your claim, so to speak. It's going to be the generalized claim from all of your sources, right? So all these sources I'm going to sum up via this one topic sentence, this main idea sentence, right? And then you demonstrate the sources, you bring in what that conversation is, and then you explain, right? The agreements, disagreements, the methods, right? The differences. And then you address the implication, what's missing, the gap in implications. Okay? So again, you make your claim, topic sentence, you bring in the evidence and you explain the evidence, the comparisons and the contrasts, agreements and disagreements, the methods, right? The agreed upon methods, the disagreed upon methods, right? And then you implicate the gap, right? What is still unresolved out there. I included here a little bit of a skeleton, right? It's just something that if it helps you, fantastic. If not, take it in your own path, so to speak, right? Please don't limit yourself. Please don't narrow your literature review to one source per paragraph. It's not good writing. That's not synthesizing. Remember, you want to bring in several sources. So you want to aim for at least 2 sources per paragraph. I would say even more if possible, right? And okay, so I hope this helps you. There's a couple of steps that you can probably follow. And then again, when you end your literature review, this is where you say, look, this is the justification for my project. What does the field, in essence, establish? What's being established in the field, right? And what am I going to establish within the field? What remains uncontested, and in other words, how am I going to fill that gap? What's underexplored? How am I going to fill in those uncontested areas? And what are you going to do? How is your study going to validate the research that is out there? Okay. Here are a couple of STEM structures in case when you're beginning that conversation, a couple of phrasings that might help you. So if there's agreement, you say several studies converge on. If they disagree, then you say, however, others find. And this is going to help you avoid the summary aspect. If you're qualifying, that means that you're kind of reinforcing, so to speak, right? This holds primarily when, right? If you're demonstrating like a causality approach, this suggests association, though, right? If you're approaching the methods, differing methods, differences may reflect measurement sources, maybe by population or species or something like that, right? Okay, so just an idea, just a little bit of a resource to help you. And so now let me show you an example. So this example I'm showing you, I took it from Google Scholar. I believe Google Scholar to be the largest database, one of the largest databases that are out there. But remember, as particularly at the university college levels, you can address the library, and they have their own database subscriptions that you can access. But this one's from Google Scholar, right? Google Scholar is accessible to everyone. And it's from Sharon Horwood and Jeremy Anglin, and it's on the problematic aspects of smartphone usage and subjective and psychological well-being, right? So implications here are, in what way are smartphones problematic to an individual's subjective and psychological well-being? So the title of the article is Problematic Smartphone Usage and Subjective and Psychological Well-Being. So I'm not really going to go over this, but there you see an abstract, there you see an introduction. If you want to get on Google Scholar, you type in the title. You can read this on your own as well, as an example. But what I wanted to focus on mainly after the introduction, there's the introduction per se. I wanted to show you the headings and the topic sentences. So look at that first topics. Look at that first heading: problematic smartphone usage. I mean, it's very clear, right? It's very clear cut. It's nothing abstract really much. Well, it's a little abstract, right? Because we don't know the details of it, but you see the heading there, right? That right there tells the reader, look, this is what this section is going to be about. So let me read that first main idea sentence, or the first topic sentence. Problematic smartphone usage has been defined as compulsive usage that leads to impaired daily functioning in terms of productivity, social relationships, physical health, or emotional well-being. So this author, they're saying, look, what I'm going to talk about here is the definition of problematic smartphone usage. And so they synthesize all these sources. Look at the sources that are there, Horwood and Anglim. And then there's Kao, Masood, Lukman, and then Ali, and Kim, Min, Lee, and Yu. There's Kwang San and Fu Yuan. There's Samaha and Awi. There's Van Duersen, Bol, Hegner, and Commerce. I apologize if I mispronounce any of those, of course. But that topic sentence there is the result of the readers, they read all these sources and they say, okay, what all these authors are saying is that they're all agreeing upon that the definition of smartphone usage, a problematic definition of smartphone usage, is this, right? Compulsive usage that leads to impaired daily functioning in terms of productivity, social relationships, physical health, or emotional well-being. They're not, that topic sentence there is not coming directly via like a quoted, right, from any one of those articles, right? It's a summation of all the articles. So that's what you're doing with the topic sentence. Okay. All right, let me go on to the next page so I can break it down even further. So I hope that's making sense so far. So you see now here's a new subheading. This new subheading says, look, and it seems it's maybe there's a little bit of a thematic approach here, right? So what was the first, what was the first theme? The first theme in that first paragraph is a problematic smartphone usage, right? Second theme, subjective and psychological well-being. Okay, so the inference here is that this heading here is going to cover how smart usage impacts subjective and psychological well-being. So let me read it and then we'll break it down. Subjective well-being has been influentially defined in terms of a tripartite model consisting of high positive affect, low negative affect, and satisfaction with life. So where did that topic sentence come from? It came from Diener, Lucas, and Oishi, Diener and Ryan, Taub and Diner. So it seems to be focusing on Diner's writings, but it's a summation of all these sources there, right? Importantly, SWB, subjective well-being, does not prescribe what should make people experience positive or negative emotions, nor does it prescribe what makes for a good life. As a complementary perspective, the construct of psychological well-being, PWB, has been proposed. It builds on the definition of subjective well-being by incorporating various aspects of human potential and the ways in which individuals cope with existential challenges in life. Where does that writing come from? That comes from the ideas of Houben, Van den Noortgate, and Coupens, Keyes and Schmotkin and Riff. Okay. Psychological well-being was developed primarily in response to criticisms that suggested SWB did not encompass a broad enough range of humanistic factors that give meaning to the concept of wellness. The most widely adopted framework for conceptualizing PWB was developed by Riff and consists of 6 dimensions: self-acceptance, positive relations with others, autonomy, right? And so forth, right? It's gonna go on and give these the six dimensions, so to speak. Okay, so breaking down that paragraph there, you notice that we have a topic sentence. So again, where does a topic sentence come from? It's a summation of your sources. This is what's being summed up here. This is what this here's this heading, and then I'm associating a topic sentence with that heading. Okay, second, so what is this paragraph emphasizing? Well, it's emphasizing the differences in several frameworks that are out there with regards to subjective and psychological well-being, right? So in essence, it's showing, look, here's a framework approach, right? The construct of psychological well-being builds on a definition of subjective well-being by incorporating various aspects of human potential and the ways in which individuals cope with existing challenges in life, right? And then, so there's that. And then also that psychological well-being was developed in response to criticism that suggested subjective well-being did not encompass a broad enough range of humanistic factors that give meaning to the concept of wellness. And here's another framework, even the most widely adopted framework for conceptualizing psychological well-being was developed by Riff. So the article here is also somewhat of a defining of this notion of subjective and psychological well-being, so to speak. It's not quite addressing the smartphone yet. The nice thing I think about the authors here is that they're separating, because they're saying, look, your smartphones, let's first address subjective and psychological well-being, and this is what the research is showing. And now the third heading, smartphone usage and well-being. So you notice they went first. They said, okay, first section, smartphone usage. Second, subjective and psychological well-being. And third, smartphone usage, the association with smartphone usage and psychological well-being. So let's look at that topic sentence again, a summation of what the research out there is showing. Initial research has found that problematic smartphone usage is negatively correlated with various conceptions of well-being, including subjective well-being. Again, where did that topic sentence come from? It's a summation. You see all those sources there, right? It's a summation of all these sources that are out there, right? And now, so the first conversation was about the smartphone usage, the problems associated with it. The second conversation is the issue of, the definition of subjective and psychological well-being. And now we're correlating smartphone usage with well-being. So the conversation then, and the rest of this article, is going to talk about, the agreements and the disagreements between smartphone usage and that well-being. So let's read a little bit. So it says, while some have interpreted this to indicate that smartphones are causing lower levels of well-being, make sure I don't miss anything. It is important to consider that well-being and related dispositional factors may also cause perceived and actual problematic smartphone usage. For example, a number of studies have identified trait neuroticism and a strong predictor of problematic smartphone usage. So here they're stating that there's a negative correlation correlation with a smartphone usage and well-being, and it's also addressing other reasons as to the use of smartphones, right? Nonetheless, there are potential explanations for how problematic smartphone usage may influence well-being. Problematic or compulsive smartphone usage can have negative impacts on users' social relationships. One element of problematic smartphone usage is known as phubbing, short for phone snubbing. the act of ignoring social others in favor of using a smartphone. Such usage is associated with poorer romantic relationship satisfaction in a number of studies. So what did that? So the first on the top, it's saying, okay, look, here are these negative aspects of smartphone usage, right? Obviously, it's generalizing that there's lower levels of well-being, and it's also saying that there are these dispositional factors which may also cause perceived and actual problematic smartphone usage. So, it's kind of saying, people are already disposed to have these problematic avenues with smartphone usage. And then it indicates trait neuroticism as a strong predictor of having problems with the smartphone. So saying, why do people have problems with smartphones? Right? So one is, trait neuroticism. And the others are, it's the cell phone itself. And then the other one is, and then the next paragraph we read right there at the bottom, right? So when it's saying, look, the cell phone is a cause of these, effects on well-being, right? These negative effects on well-being. And another one saying, well, look, there's a biological disposition that's leading people to having problems with the cell phones, right? And then they're saying, okay, look, let's go back to the problems of smartphones on well-being, and one is social relationships. So you see how there's a conversation about perspectives, different perspectives. So there's all these different conversations about, it's the cell phone that's causing problems. It's dispositions that are causing problems. No, it's the cell phones that are causing problems, particularly to social relationships, right? And then it says, look, there are all these mechanisms, right, that lead to problematic smartphone usage are not yet clear. There's evidence to suggest that characteristics of users may predict who's more likely to develop a problematic relationship with their phone. So see, it's really interesting, right? It kind of says, okay, so is it the cell phone that's going to cause problems, the cell phone in and of itself, or is it a disposition, right? Is it a biological disposition that's going to lead me to maybe be overly addicted to it and have problems with it, right? So there's all these many aspects. You see, it's pretty powerful because, gosh, it's opening up so many doors. It's saying, like, we really don't know. And another thing you might want to do, I didn't point this out, but another thing you want to do is maybe look at the date of the article. You don't want to get an article that's too outdated, because then it's gonna who knows, you're offering a new approach and then you start looking at more contemporary literature, maybe somebody already did your study, and then so it's going to become slightly irrelevant, right? Okay, so there it is. I'm developing a conversation on agreements or disagreements, on gaps. And then look what we do here towards the end of the literature review, that last sentence there. Thus, we aim to explore two specific questions with respect to problematic smartphone usage and well-being. First, we examine the relationship between problematic smartphone use and well-being. Second, given the emerging evidence of smartphone-related techno-stress, relationship stress, and disruptions in daily living, we examine whether specific aspects of well-being are more likely to be related to problematic smartphone use than others. Specifically, we aim to investigate the strength of the relationships between problematic smartphone usage and psychological well-being subscales. So what are they doing there in that last paragraph? They're saying, this is what my study's going to do, right? Whether your study's argumentative or analytical, you're saying, look, this is what my study's aiming for, right? And then the next section is the method, but that'll be another presentation. So I hope this helps, right? I did repeat a little bit. Hopefully that repetition is going to help you absorb aspects of the literature review. And so yeah, you want to follow a heading and then a claim via topic, topic statements, summing up agreements in your sources. You want to bring in the evidence. You want to talk about the agreements and disagreements. You want to talk about the gaps that are there, right? And then once you've done all these headings and all these topics and all these agreements and disagreements and mention of the gaps, then you approach it and say, this is what my research is going to do, and in a way infer how it's going to fill in some of these gaps. Okay. I hope this has helped you, right? You're certainly free to access other sources, but I hope at least this source has provided you with some guidance and some approaches to writing of the literature review. Thank you.